Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Futures Bilingual podcast. My name is Heather. If it's your first time tuning in, welcome. And if you've been here before, thank you for joining me again. Today's episode is about ensuring enough exposure. So, we're going to look at this two ways. Either you are raising bilingual or multilingual kids, and you want to make sure they get enough exposure to their minority language or languages. And we can also look at it from the perspective of someone learning another language and wanting to get enough exposure to that new language in order to keep making progress. So, as a multilingual parent myself, and also as a continual language learner, I like to look at it in these two ways. I'm also a professional language teacher and have been for 17 years, which is kind of crazy. And if you want to learn more about me, you can see all about that on the website. So, without further ado, let's get into this question of exposure and how much do we need? How much is enough? So, I want to take you all the way back to the beginning, and I want you to start with your why. Your why is your reason for either wanting to learn the language or wanting your child to speak the language. So, you need to think way back. And if you haven't thought about this before, maybe you don't have kids yet and you're thinking about possibly raising your children bilingually, start with your why always, because this is your foundation. This is your grounding point. Whenever you have struggles or challenges or people questioning you, you are going to know exactly why you are doing this because it's not something that happens without effort. Raising a bilingual child takes effort, takes thought and planning. Okay, so you want to start with why does your child need to speak this language, or why do you yourself want to learn this language? So hopefully you have a pretty good reason. You have something kind of strong, and even if it's not that strong yet, maybe you will build deeper roots with it, right? So maybe you're just interested in this language for some reason, like me with Japanese. I don't really have a good reason that I'm interested in Japanese, but the more I spend time learning it and delving into the culture, maybe those roots are going to grow deeper. Or maybe, on the other hand, this is your heritage language, or this is the heritage language of your spouse, right? So you might have some really obvious reasons, or you might need to think about it a little bit more and learn more. The second part of this why is to think about the skills that you would want your child to have, or you yourself want to have. And you can also think about that in like relation to a level that you would want your child to attain, or maybe you yourself. So think about who will your child be speaking to? Will they be writing? Do they need to know how to read? Right? What is this all ties into that goal you have of what you want your child to do or what you yourself, if you're learning a language, what do you want to do with this? So just to go back to Japanese for a second, when I traveled to Japan with the high school I used to teach at, I just wanted to focus on listening and speaking because I didn't have a lot of time. They just asked me kind of a few months before the trip if I wanted to chaperone. And the writing system, as you know, is complicated. So I focused on listening and speaking in that moment. If I wanted to continue to learn and continue to progress, then I would probably go into learning how to write, learning how to read the three different scripts and all of those things. But maybe your goal for your child is just to speak to their family that is from a language and they don't really need to read and write it per se. So again, this is going to be personal for each family. What are the goals? Do you want them to be able to read, write, speak? Of course, we need to speak and listen. Do they need to have cultural knowledge of that place? Or is it enough to just have the language? So there's many different parts to being a competent speaker, and it's not just academic, it's also cultural, right? There's different registers of language, there's academic language, there's street language, there's different variants depending on which even city is spoken in. So you really want to think, what does my child need? And take it in chunks, right? Take it in parts. You don't have to have this grandiose plan, but start small and you can always add more. All right, so that is number one, starting with your why, going back to the why, making sure your foundation is super solid so you know exactly why you're going to work on getting more exposure, right? Number two, now we're going to dive into your routine, your schedule, and how many hours your child is spending with this language each day. Now, if you're a learner, that's going to be how many hours are you spending with the language each day? And this needs to be a very honest look. Okay. It can't just be like, oh, well, my plan is to study 2 hours every day. No, you need to actually look at your day to day. Are you studying 2 hours every day? Right? It's not the ideal that my child is going to spend 6 hours in the target language. No, I have to be honest and say, what is my child actually doing every day in the target language? How much exposure are they actually getting? So when you look at the morning, what happens in our morning routine? What time do we wake up? The kids go to school. I know from X hour to X hour, they're going to be in the majority language at school, right? The dominant language of this community. When they come home, what does that look like? What are we doing? Who's speaking to them? Where are they going? Which days do they have practice, right? So all these things and extracurricular activities and who's in the family and who's helping and who's doing, after school care and all of these factors, they add up. So I want you to count not only the hours that your child is speaking the target language, the language they're trying to learn, or the minority language or the heritage language, whatever you want to call it. I want you to also look at the majority language. So in the case of a bilingual, right, they have the majority language and the minority language. If your family has a more complicated dynamic where there's 3 languages or even 4 languages, same thing. I want you to look at the number of hours for each of those languages and look at the balance, right? Because it's not just about, oh, okay, my child is getting 3 hours of Polish every day, but okay, they're getting 3 hours of Polish, but they're maybe getting 15 hours of English. So it's still going to be unbalanced, right? It's still going to be a lot more hours of English. How can I, right, balance or counterbalance this so that it's not one language getting a lot more attention, a lot more exposure, and therefore my child becoming a lot more comfortable and familiar with language A, the dominant language, and feeling less and less competent in language B as they grow older, right? Okay, so we're looking very honestly at what's happening and not to judge, not to feel bad, but just to get a really clear picture of what's happening in our day-to-day lives because we're busy, right? A lot of us are working parents, and even if you're not, right, we're all busy, right? And we all are doing something. This reminds me of the fact that people say like, I don't have a morning routine, but everybody has a routine that they're doing. Even if it doesn't look exactly the same every day, you have things you're doing, right? So people always think like, I don't have a morning routine, I don't have an evening routine, or like we don't have a bilingual plan for raising our children, but having no plan is your plan. Like whatever it is you're doing, that is the plan you are going by. So if you're not intentionally creating something, if you're not intentionally carving out time for the minority language, it's very easy for that dominant language to seep in and to take over. And I'm speaking from experience here. So we're all in this boat. And it, like I said in the beginning, it takes constant effort and consistency and like resilience to keep kind of fighting if you want your child to have the minority language. All right, so as we take this honest look at our hours, you also need to, or you don't need to, but I'm suggesting you can look at whether this is time actively spent using the language or is it time that's spent more passively. All right, so what do I mean by that? Active is when your child or yourself, right? You are speaking, you're listening, you're engaging with a person, like having actual conversation in the language. This could also be time where you are writing, so you are actively creating with the language. So you could think of it as productive, right? You're producing something, you're doing something with the language. Passive, we might be more familiar with, right? Those are times where you're listening. So those are all those times we're watching TV, watching YouTube, listening to music, right? Maybe just listening to the parents speaking the language. there's different ways that we can be passively engaged in the language. But as you can probably guess, the times where we ourselves or our children are actively engaged with the language are going to be times where we're learning more and we're going to remember what we've learned more because our whole body, our brains and our mouths and our body is actively engaged in using this language, right? Versus just passively sitting and watching a movie or scrolling on the iPad reading something in the language, right? Those are more passive and therefore a little bit less engaging and maybe less likely to stick into the memory. Okay, so those are your options, right? First thing we're doing is our why. Second thing we're doing is taking a really honest look at our hours and how we're spending them, right, in our languages. And this does not have to be super detailed. This can be like a very broad overview. Like I said, 6 hours, 7 hours at school. During the week, there's like a couple hours of soccer practice and games. So let's say 6 hours are spent in soccer. So that's in English, right? I can kind of do this quickly in my head without it being super detailed. And if you are a very detailed person, feel free to go crazy, make an Excel table, do whatever you want. But yes, let's take an honest look at what we're actually doing because this is going to help us to plan where we can fit in more time, right? If this is our goal to get more exposure, that means we need to be able to plan when that's going to happen. So the third thing we're going to do, as I was just alluding to, is to look at this overall picture that we've just created and redefine what is our goal, right? What are we going to change? What would we like to do differently? Because the whole reason for going through this process and looking at our hours and things is that we're realizing maybe we need more exposure. Our child needs more exposure, right? We want to make a little bit of an improvement to what's happening. We want to be more consistent or we want to be more intentional about what we're doing. So redefine that goal. Look at your schedule in an honest way and see what can we do differently? Where do we have some pockets of time where we could fit in the minority language? So I'll just give you some quick examples, right, from my own life where I could be putting in more Polish. And maybe I haven't been, but these are easy areas that I can control because when we look at our schedule, it's also going to be what do I have control over and what do I not have control over, right? So that we can kind of look at it that way. Like school is out of my hands. The kids go to school, it's in English, right? Soccer practice, of course, it's going to be out of my hands. That's in English. So those are times where I have to kind of give up the control. However, the times that we are home is when I can say, okay, this is what I can do. These are times that are in my control, right? So just quickly, I can name like when the kids wake up first thing in the morning, right? We can be speaking Polish. That whole morning routine, breakfast, the drive to the bus or the drive to school, after school, depending on what time you pick up your kids, right? That time can be spent in the target language for us, Polish. The bedtime routine, the bath routine, the dinner, right? I can look at all of these pockets of time. The weekend, of course, is a wonderful opportunity for more exposure because we have our kids at home, depending on how your extracurriculars might play into your weekend, like games and things. But for the most part, we have a lot more hours at home. Now, if you're a homeschool parent, maybe you have a lot of control over the schedule and what you do throughout the day, right? There's all different scenarios. Maybe your kid goes to a half a day daycare, so it's only 3 hours that your child is out of the house. Again, this is so personal, and every parent or every couple needs to look at this together or on their own and just see what their day looks like. Same for someone who's trying to learn a language. You need to really be honest, like, what are your hours for work? What are your other commitments that you're doing, right? If you have kids, if you have a spouse, if you have a full-time job, a part-time job, any of and all of these things take up part of your time. So where can you find those pockets of time if you do want to sit and study, if you do want to watch something and then actively engage in that movie or show that you're watching? Where are you going to fit that in? Okay, so define the goal. What is it that you want to do more of? What is it you want to do differently? And then your next task, number four, is to find those resources. So if you know, for example, myself, I need to speak more Arabic. As someone who's trying to learn Arabic, I need to find time to speak more, but I know I also need more exposure to how it sounds, right? And the natural rhythm of the language. I can't just speak from my own mind. I have to be exposed. So this, I do want to say the passive, I made it sound a little bit negative, but it's super important, especially at the beginning, to have lots of input and lots of exposure to a language in order to be able to produce, right? Children, they need exposure, but adults as well, we need lots of exposure. I need lots of listening, for example, to Arabic, to Japanese, to Italian, in order for me to feel comfortable expressing myself in those languages. So this is what we're working on. We're trying to get more exposure. So where can I find time? Let's say I want to read more in Italian. I have some books that I want to read. I want to listen to Arabic more. I want to find more time to speak. And right, I want to keep teaching my kids Polish. All of these goals, right? Lofty goals. Where am I going to find the time? Okay, once I look at my schedule, great. Where am I going to find resources for all of these things? So this is a chance if you have time, right? Make some time to delve into different resources. We have the world at our fingertips. We are so spoiled with the internet. Now there's AI, it makes things even faster, even easier. There's really no excuse to say, like, I don't have what I need. We can really find almost anything. And yes, there are lesser spoken languages. There are languages that are harder to find written examples of. And I'll be publishing an episode soon about one of those. But um, you can, inshallah, you're going to find the resources that you want and reach out and find other people who maybe know where those resources are. Again, there's a lot of connections you can make thanks to the internet. So maybe you can't find them, but somebody else has or somebody else can. All right, here are just some quick things that we can do. I'm speaking to myself first before I'm speaking to any of you, that can help our child get more exposure. So if I speak the language, then I need to find the time and increase the amount of time that I speak to my child in that language. So I'm not a native Polish speaker, but I do speak Polish. So I could do a better job speaking to my kids in Polish to make sure that they're getting exposure to that language, right? Even if it's not 100% of the time, something is better than nothing, especially with languages. This small amount of exposure is actually very powerful, and we think it might not be enough, but there's no magic number, right? Yes, they're going to be less maybe comfortable and fluent, but something is better than nothing, right? So find more time to speak to your child if you are a speaker of that language. If you do not speak the language, right, then you need to find another speaker who can be spending time with your child. Now, this could be an outside resource, like a tutor or a school, like there's Saturday schools and things like that. But this could also be a family member if this is a heritage language for you, right? Maybe this is a family member, like an aunt or an uncle or a cousin or somebody. And they don't even have to be present. They can be called on FaceTime and on Google Meets and WhatsApp and all the things. You might find a babysitter. You could find an au pair. That's an expensive option, but it's possible. Like I mentioned, there's tutors that tutor online, in person. My kids go to a Saturday Polish school, so that's another way for them to get exposure to lots of other people who speak the language and not just mom, dad, and grandma and grandpa. So find other resources. And by this, I mean an actual person, right? Even if they don't meet in real life, but they're meeting online, it should be like a person who's alive, right? Um, Other resources, right? Another category would be finding like passive resources. So YouTube channels, TV shows, movies, and things of that nature. But these are separate, right? Real people separate from the online world where they're not having interaction, right? There's a difference between having interaction, your child says something and the tutor is going to say something back, versus just watching somebody on YouTube. They're not interacting with you. Okay, you can also use some different methods to help you like stick to a new habit. So if I want to say speak to my kids in Polish during the morning while we're getting ready, right? The first thing I do when I wake up is I brush my teeth so I can tell myself, okay, brush your teeth and, right, remind myself to speak to the kids in Polish while I'm doing that or while I'm making coffee, whatever that first thing that you do in the morning, you stack that habit on top of it. Like, and language is kind of one of those things that once you start, the ball kind of just keeps rolling, right? It kind of just flows naturally once you start it. It's like that first step maybe is difficult, especially if it's not your native tongue, like for myself. But then it just kind of becomes a habit. It becomes the norm, right? And eventually, maybe that first day feels a little rough, but then it becomes very natural. You can also pick certain, like I said, times of day, like breakfast time, or even certain days when you're gonna speak that language to your kids and give them exposure. This is if, like, for example, if you want to balance all the time they're getting with the majority language, or if you're trying to introduce a third language, having a specific day or time of day to introduce that can have it be defined, right? Kind of giving it a box to live in so that it's not just like, oh, when I feel like it, I'll speak French. Like, no, I'm going to speak French on this day and this day to my kids. And also just to remember to utilize these little pockets of time, find resources and kind of associate them with a certain pocket of time. Like when we are driving to soccer, we are going to listen to these certain videos, right? Like maybe I have songs that are in Polish, or I have like something educational where they're going to talk to the kids, right? I have all these kind of different resources, or a story time. Have a couple of different resources, right? You can give kids options like, do you want to hear a story or do you want to listen to music? Right. But I have my kind of curated list of like, here's some Polish music and here's some Polish stories. Let them pick. And then we utilize that small pocket of, right, 20 minutes driving to soccer where we can listen to those things. So yeah, having really good resources to kind of pull and knowing how long, right? Like this would be a good time for this. And when it's before bed, we're going to listen to this or we're going to read this. So having certain resources kind of reserved or designated for certain times of day, right? It just takes the guesswork and it takes the thinking out of it. Putting them near the place where you want to use them, right? So having the Polish books next to the kids' beds so that they can easily grab them, right? And they don't have to go and get up and leave the room and go downstairs. No, right? Take all of that difficulty away, make it really easy. You can put your, what are these things called? Like those Alexas and things into the target language. You can put your GPS into the target language. Make it easy. Make it not a challenge to find these resources, right? Once you find them, make them really accessible and easy to go to, right? It shouldn't involve opening too many drawers and diving through lots of papers, right? Like make it as easy as possible so that these are things you will reach for. All right, there's probably a lot more things I could say on this topic, but I think the biggest thing I want to say and encourage you to do is to take some time to really look at your schedule, really reflect back on your goals and your why, and then take some time to find some more resources if you do feel like you're in a rut or you've been using the same things or you're in need of something, and find a community where people can help you find those resources, get that inspiration, talk to others, listen to others. There's lots of groups on Facebook, there's groups on Instagram. There are podcast episodes you can listen to with on my podcast and other podcasts. So just kind of find your tribe, get that motivation back if you're lacking in motivation. And I hope, inshallah, that this episode will motivate you to think a little bit more about the schedule and how you can be intentional in getting more exposure for your child or for yourself, depending on your language goals. I would love to hear from you guys. I would love to hear what languages you're teaching your children, what languages you're learning or have learned. I'm always looking for podcast guests to come on and tell us their story. So you can go to my website, which is thefutureisbilingual.com, with WordPress somewhere in there, but you'll find it if you Google The Future is Bilingual. You can contact me there. You can find me on Instagram. The Future is Bilingual. And I hope to hear from you guys soon. Happy learning and happy teaching. Take care. Bye bye.